God aften. Velkommen til online-smagning med Whiskyheroes-serien, som vi var så heldige at få agenturet på vores sidste tur til Skotland. Med os i aften, der har vi et par stykker her i lokalet. Vi vil lige prøve at skifte over, så vi kan hilse på dem også. Vi har Paul. Vi har Kai. Og så har vi Per. Og ikke mindst, så har vi Paul Dempsey from the UK. Say hi, Paul.
Evening, everybody. Hello. Welcome to Scotland.
Okay, Scotland. Sorry.
That's okay. Well, welcome to the UK, but you know.
That's fine. That's fine. Paul, could you start with introducing yourself a little bit? Who you are, what you're doing at Brave New Spirit?
Okay. Yes, thank you, Brian. Good evening, everybody. My name is Paul Dempsey. I am the Sales and Marketing Director for a company called Brave New Spirits. We are an independent bottler based in Glasgow. We're about 3 years old. We're also the builder of the Witchburn Distillery in Campbelltown. You can see the banner behind me, which will start producing spirit in December this year. The largest, or the first distillery in Campbelltown for I think 100 years, and the largest distillery from an independent for a long time in Scotland. My job is to work with distributors, to work with whiskey followers around the world. I also help to choose our casks. Between us, there's a small team of us. Alex, one of the owners, and a few of our production team decide which cask to bottle, decide whether we do cask finishes or re-racks, and come up with the names and try and get the whiskies out to you. So it's a small company, but we all have about 3 different jobs. So
that's lovely.
And a lot of fun. So
yeah, I can imagine. We did have a lot of fun when we visited you in April, I know. It was a late night stand, but it was okay. What have you done in the past, Paul? In the whiskey industry, I mean.
Yeah. I joined Brave New Spirits about 2 years ago. So about a year after they started, effectively to run what they call the connoisseurs department, which is the small batch and the limited editions and the single cask. So working very closely with Alex, who you know. Prior to that, I was the commercial head for Speyside Distillery, who had a whiskey brand called Spey. I was there for about 8 years. Before that, I was the UK distributor for Bruichladdich, until Bruichladdich sold to Remy Cointreau.
Okay.
And my whiskey career started about 7 or 8 years before that, when I was the distributor for. I worked for a UK company, and we were the distributor for Morrison Bowmore, which at the time was Bowmore, Auchentoshan, and Suntory. We also had Glen Grant as a client, and Isle of Arran. So I've worked with a few distilleries. This is the first independent bottler I've been involved with. So, I also work as a judge at various different spirits review panels around the world. So my next one is in China, but I've worked in Chile, Mexico, Germany, you know, for Whiskey Magazine, for various different titles. So all of it connected to whiskey. So.
Yeah, cool. Great to see you anyway. We have spoken a few times over WhatsApp and wrote a few emails, but I think this is the first time I actually see you in live.
Well, we didn't know what Zoom was until 3 or 4 years ago, so it's great that we can do these things. Then hopefully at some point in the future we can do them face to face in a room as well. So
yeah, I would love that. I'll come tomorrow. Well, shall we get started? I think people are sitting in the living rooms in Denmark, and I can see we have someone from Sweden as well. So let's get started with the first one. The first one we will start with tonight is the Blair Athol. Og jeg skal sige til jer, der sidder ude i stuerne, hvis I har nogle spørgsmål undervejs, så skriv gerne i chatten. Så forsøger vi at fange dem her løbende og få svaret på dem. Og kan jeg ikke svare på det, så skal jeg sørge for, at Paul Dempsey han kommer til at svare på det i hvert fald. Om I skriver på dansk eller engelsk, det er helt op til jer. Men lad os starte med den første. En Blair Athol, som sagt, 12 år gammel. Har lært på et first fill bourbon hogshead. And maybe, Paul, you could explain just a little bit about the Blair Athol.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, we got a big audience here, so I don't know if there's any other independent bottlers involved in the tasting here, but one of the things we do is we try and identify the best casks to bottle. So Blair Athol is a distillery that most people know, but there is not a lot of distillery bottlings. So it's very good for independent bottlers, because what we don't want to do is just copy what the distillery does. So we always look for ways to make if we choose whiskey from a certain distillery, we always want to make it different from what you could get if you buy it at the distillery. That way we don't clash with anything the distillery is doing. And there's some great examples in this range. The Whiskyheroes whole range, we decided to do, unusual labels, but these are classic whiskey flavor styles. So these are all either sherry or bourbon. Some are single cask, some are small batch. The Blair Athol is a bourbon cask. We are on, I believe, a single cask. Single cask, 257 bottles. And it's first fill bourbon hogshead, 12 years old. So Blair Athol, you tend only to see the distillery bottling, and they usually do it as part of the flora and fauna range. So this is different from that. But it's a great whiskey to start a tasting, because Blair Athol is a great distillery that is used for most of what they produce goes to blenders. So it's got a structure that works with lots of different cask styles, lots of different flavor profiles, and in its classic bourbon cask guise, it's a lovely way to start. Flavor notes of, please put your tasting notes in the chat bar if you want, but for us, I don't have one here, which I'm sad about. I've got one of everything else to join you later. But yeah, lots of citrus, apples, green grass, very fresh cream. But please, everybody's palate's a little bit different. We bottled this at 55.1%. So if you do need a little bit of water, please do. But again, these are bottled by flavor. We didn't deliberately do high strength. We didn't dilute them down. Hopefully the bottling strength was decided by a few of us.
Ja. Cool. Lovely. Jeg skulle lige indskyde også i øvrigt, at hvis man bestiller på webshoppen i aften og bestiller minimum 2 flasker, så giver vi 10% rabat. Der er ikke nogen rabatkode, men skriv i kommentarfeltet på ordren whiskysmagning, så skal vi nok sørge for, at der kommer en rabatkode ud på fakturen i hvert fald. Yes. Paul, how old is the company?
The company started in 2020. It's a product of lockdown.
Yeah.
So we are approaching our 4th birthday. We now have over 30 staff. We have people based. We have one lady based in Japan, one gentleman based in China. Mm-hmm. The company is owned by 2 people. One of whom, Brian, is Alex, who was an independent bottler in Germany for a number of years. He joined forces with a gentleman called Adam, who previously worked for a company called Athol, which owned the
company
McDavid
we don't
brand.
mention. Yeah.
They own the Murray McDavid brand, and the 2 of them joined forces. We now, 3.5 years later, we're probably one of the bigger independent bottlers already in Scotland. We have a few different whiskey ranges. We have a high volume range, which we can sell to supermarkets in places like China. We have a premium range, which is, we have premium ranges, which we're looking at now, the single cask, the real nice premium collectible, interesting single distillery stuff. And we now have a warehouse, a bottling hall, and soon we'll have a distillery too. So,
and you also have I know you have a filling station as well in the warehouse, because in April when we were visiting you were sadly not there, but we filled a couple of casks ourselves there, so that was quite fun.
Yeah, well, I mean, we were looking for a warehouse. I know Adam and Alex have been looking for a warehouse for ages because one of the things when you're an independent bottler, you have your cask stored in warehouses all over the country. And if you wanted a sample, you've got to find out where the cask is. Sometimes it can take weeks, depending on the warehouse, to get hold of your sample. So, in an ideal world, we would love to have every cask that we owned in the same place where we can access them quickly. But the warehouse that you saw in April is currently being expanded. So
Yeah, I think Alex mentioned something about that. You were going to expand the warehouse where you had the new cask line.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. So we are we're going to expand the warehouse. It's happening now. So those of us who don't work in the warehouse, my office used to be up the stairs from where you guys were. We're now in a rented office down the street in town. And the warehouse is still there, but we're expanding the building that's in. So we should be able to get several hundred more casks in there, maybe even several thousand.
Yeah, sounds good.
But we have a small bottling line, so we can bottle single casks there. We do that for ourselves, but we also do that for special bottlings for events or for importers and things like that. So,
Oh, great. Well, should we go to the second one? See if everyone is ready. Some of you guys, undskyld, nogle af jer, der sidder ude i stuerne, kan jeg se, der har tændt kamera på. Det er fedt, så vi kan følge med i, hvad I laver også. Hvis der er et eller andet, så ræk en hånd op, så kan jeg se jer måske. Prøv at følge lidt med op på skærmen foran mig og se, hvad I foretager jer. Men Paul, we're going to start with number 2 now. Adventures in the Meadow, Secret Speyside. Can we tell them what it is, or is that a deep secret?
I can give some clues, and then let's see. If anybody's using the chat function, put your guesses in the chat bar. Let's see if we can.
Yeah, that'd be lovely.
Let's see if we can have some fun.
Yeah.
This is. I think it won't take long for you to guess. But this is again, it's a single cask, 308 bottles. It's from a distillery in Speyside. It's a distillery that's family owned, and it's probably one of the most traditional distilleries there. In that, this might be the giveaway. They still have direct fired stills. If you ever visit, which you can do, it's a great distillery to visit. A lot of the distillery staff still live in the site, so it is the way it was 150 years ago. Very famous, one of the most famous family-owned distilleries in Scotland, I think. And very famous for whiskies in sherry casks.
Yeah, and we can also give a hint that it starts with a Glen.
Yes. Very famous for sherry cask whiskies. And that's why this one interested us so much, because this is bourbon cask, and I don't think they've ever done a distillery bottling in a bourbon cask before.
No, I don't think so.
This is a superb example of why indie bottling is such fun, because you can find things like this. The distillery wouldn't bottle it.
But if you ever visit this distillery, you will see quite fast that every warehouse door is red.
Yes. And you might see, I mean, we've got the names of the whiskies. We've called this one Adventures in the Meadow. And I think if you translated the name of this distillery in Gaelic back to English, you get the phrases like Valley of the Green Grass and all this kind of stuff. And it's, because of the bourbon cask and the meadows and the grass, we wanted to reflect some of that. But you'll notice that there's quite a bit of red on the label in our character that's on the front.
Ja, er der nogen, der har nogle bud? Jeg kan se, der Henning, han har skrevet en bud i hvert fald. Er der andre bud på, hvad det kunne være?
I can see in the chat bar somebody might have already said the correct one.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so Rasmus og Henning har skrevet Glenfarclas, og det må vi jo så sige, det er et ganske udmærket gæt.
I'm going to join you in this one.
You should. You deserve it. You deserve it.
It's been a tough week at the office, you know. So.
Yeah. Slunchy.
Blanche, thank you. This is what it's one cask, and it's a bourbon cask. It's not a first fill. It's 16 years old, so it's had lots and lots of time to soak up the flavors from the wood.
You can feel in the mouth that it's not a young whiskey, but it's definitely not a first fill. I would say.
Oh, you can see that from the color. So.
Yeah, maybe a third fill. I would say, but you never know.
Well, I mean, I have my theory about this one, and it's something that I've seen a few times over the years, but a lot of distilleries have filling contracts as part of their design. So they'll have contracts with, for example, companies like Gordon MacPhail. So they know that every year if they produce 100,000 litres, they'll have an agreement to supply 10% to Gordon MacPhail or whatever, or to blenders. I mean, a lot of these distilleries historically always had contracts with a few blenders. And I think this was probably the result of whiskey that was designed from the start to be, for one of their blending partners. That's why it's a bourbon cask. That's why it's not a first fill bourbon cask, because this maybe originally was intended to go off to be part of a contract. Most distilleries had filling agreements with different producers. That was a great way of guaranteeing that they had a certain amount of income every year. If you sat down in front of the bank and said, well, we have orders from this company, this company, this company, and we have to supply this amount of litres for spirits so that they can blend, Johnny Walker or Teachers or Dewars or whatever. So I think this was originally maybe meant for that, but in the ensuing 16, 17 years, you realise that the whiskey has matured perfectly. It's beautiful. So we don't have to do anything to the cask to change it. So
actually, Paul, I got a cask of Glenfarclas myself, also in ex-bourbon. It should have been bottled a couple of years ago, but it's just not ready yet. It's still very, very strong. It tastes wonderful already now, but it's still strong. It just burns your tongue off. So we're going to wait at least a year more to get that bottled.
Again, with the bourbon cask, there's a little bit of vanilla, the baked apples. The extra age gives it a little bit heavier structure. And again, Glenfarclas, because they're one of those distilleries, because they have direct fire stills, they're distilling at different temperatures to every other distillery in the region. And most distilleries now, their distillation is planned by science. They've got steam heat. They know how to work it. But Glenfarclas is still very, very traditional. So, probably a higher temperature. But the whiskey that comes out is fantastic. So,
well, I'm going to pour a small dram here for our cameraman. He's looking very, very thirsty right now.
Very thirsty. Meget olie i.
Ja, der er meget olie i. Jeg håber, I kan lide den derude. Der kommer lidt få kommentarer her, at this is super nice. Main note for me is honey. It's a great place to visit. And I can agree on all of that.
Great. I'm reading the chat bar, and somebody's mentioned honey. It's a great tasting note, actually. It really...
Nice sweetness in the sense as well.
Yeah, and proper heather honey as well. The sort of honey they get the sort of honey they sell in distillery gift shops for anybody that's ever toured around Scotland. So.
But also oily and a bit of fat in a sense.
Yeah. I think you mentioned at the start, Brian, that you can tell there's a bit of age here. And there's certain distilleries in this region, there's certain distilleries in Scotland that, you know, they just distill a different way. Most new distilleries all distill the same. Effectively, we're using science now, but a lot of these older ones, and there's some good examples in Speyside, Craigellachie, Benrinnes, you know, the whiskey they produce is, you know, you can tell if you taste the new make side by side that there's a structure, you know, a mineral quality in some of these. That oiliness, the fattiness, you know, Mortlack's another, Linkwood. And these are just, you know, maybe because they were distilleries that a lot of them were either doing things they haven't changed in over 100 years, or they were producing specifically, or originally mainly producing for blenders, so the whiskies needed to carry different styles of flavour, so the distillery character is different. So.
Ja, cool. Jeg håber, I kan lide den. Glenfarclas Unnamed. Giv den ikke, hvis I kan lide den, eller en thumbs up på chatten, så vi kan følge med i, hvad I synes. Det kunne være super nice. Der er nogle stykker, der giver thumbs up, og store smil derude. Fedt at se. Fedt. Okay. Let's try number 3 then. Call of Submission. Cameronbridge.
Yeah. I'm going to join you again.
Yeah, please do.
This is another one of these ones.
You should know the supplier anyway.
Yeah. Now, since we have several ranges of whiskey, every time we've done a batch, we'll maybe put 6 whiskies out. One of them will usually be a single grain. It could be a North British. We've even bottled things from Portland, which doesn't exist anymore. But this one comes from Cameronbridge, which I think might still be the biggest distillery in Scotland. It produces something like 110 million litres of spirit a year. It is not a pretty distillery. For anybody that's ever driven past, a lot of grain distilleries, you know, they look like factories. They look like some, you know, because they run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And effectively, this distillery is a machine that produces spirit for the industry. The thing with grain whiskey, a couple of plus points. One, over the years, we've discovered that if you don't use it for blending and you let it age, old grain whiskey can come in with some phenomenal flavors. The other thing is, because they're using column stills rather than pot stills, so pot still being the big brass kettle you see on a distillery tour, but column stills, which distill to a higher ABV, then effectively there's a lot less distillery character when you use a grain whiskey. But that means, I think, my own view, if you then use really active casks, so if you start using first fill casks or exciting wine casks, you can put the flavors and the colors in very, very quickly. So what you've got here, this is 14 years, but it's full term matured in Pedro Jimenez sherry. So for the sherry cask aficionados, this, you know, PX is probably the sweetest sherry you can get hold of. I know chefs that use this in desserts. It makes a great reduction, a great syrup. You see it on sorbets if you've ever been lucky enough to go to Jerez in the summertime for
yeah. Did you say it was full matured in a sherry cask?
Yeah, 14 years old in a first fill Pedro Jimenez sherry cask.
Oh, okay. You
Pedro
don't see
Jimenez,
that often.
Hogshead. So
yeah.
So again, one cask, 296 bottles. But Pedro Jimenez, or PX as we call it, is the most.
There's lots of caramel in the
sherry. You know, they make it by letting the grapes dry out really dry before they press them and get the juice. And it's super, super sweet as a result. But with grain whiskey, you get lighter distillery character, maybe a little bit more acetone flavors. But this then, I think with grain whiskey, you can get more of the cask if you're using active casks. And the nose on this is just incredible. You know, you've got...
It's just amazing. Just amazing. The sweetness, the caramel, the sugar, the sherry, of course.
You've got
It's
candy,
just,
you've got cream, you've got
yeah, I
um,
just love it.
uh, you know, and with any sherry cask whiskey, one of the great things about sherry cask is, bourbon casks are reasonably simple whiskies. But if you use a sherry cask, you get more complexity. So there's more chance of getting the spices, the nuts, the herbal notes, and that's happening here. This is just, it's almost like a rum. There's so much sweetness there.
Don't mention it.
But the other good thing about grain whiskey, from an independent bottler's point of view, grain distilleries produce huge amounts of spirit, so it's always available to independent bottlers. It's not expensive. It's less expensive than single malt because there's more of it.
Absolutely.
So if you find a good one, it's usually not that expensive. I mean, I've seen 30-year-old single grains on the market, and they're the same price as 12 and 15-year-old single malts.
Yeah, exactly.
They're not meant to compete, but it's a great. I think people now are starting to realize they don't. It used to be a few years ago that if you were in a shop, single malt was always the glamour one, and they would look at blends, but single grain was something tucked away. It was never. There's a lot of good single grains appearing now. It's a great way to bring interesting things to whiskey.
We actually bottled a 33-year-old North British in January.
Yeah.
It's just so smooth, elegant, nice whiskey for a decent amount of money, I would say.
Yeah, and I mean we've had so much success with grain whiskey. We've started putting this one into some of the awards panels. So hopefully as the year goes on, you'll see us getting recognition and good reviews for this one. But predecessors to this, we've released whiskies from Cameronbridge, we've released North British, we've released some Portland Das, we've released some Invergordon. And when you do a blind tasting, or if you do a whiskey festival and you have the bottle there and people taste it, you don't tell them what it is. They're always surprised, If we told them it was single grain at the start, they might not want to try it. So, but if they don't try it, then it's more for the rest of us to enjoy. So.
Hvad siger I ude i stuen derude? Der kommer ikke voldsomt mange kommentarer. Per, hvad siger du?
Den kan overraskende godt klare lidt vand.
Okay.
Det havde jeg ikke regnet med, men det kan faktisk godt. Det er ikke, at den behøver det, men...
Nej, jeg synes ikke, den umiddelbart behøver det.
Dessert. Ja.
Er det nærmest som en dessertkage? Ja.
Jeg synes tit vand og sherry, det går ikke så godt sammen, men...
Jeg synes, sherryen kommer meget mere frem, når man kommer vand i. Ja.
I'm still looking at the comments in the chat, and somebody said, I wish it was a bit more oily. Yeah, that's again with grain whiskies. That oiliness tends to come from some of the old classic single malts more than you would get from a grain. I think grain whiskey, if you taste grain new make, it's quite light. It's like acetone. It's I think they rely more on the producers to choose the cask or maybe what they blend it with to give it some character,
Yeah, but I don't like acetone in my whiskey.
No, but that's. I mean, if you let it run all the way to the top of the still, you've got neutral alcohol and it becomes gin. So, young grain new make is designed for blending, designed for indie bottlers to experiment with. Once you've got some age or some good casks on it, that's when you start to see the flavors really, really develop. So,
okay, cool. So, number 4, completely different story.
Okay, and which, I'm just looking at the charts here.
The Miltonduff.
There we go. This is the Eerie Silence. I need to get my bottle. I love this work when I get to drink, so it's lovely.
Yeah, I know it's a hard job we have. We need to try a lot.
Oh, you should see. I mean, there's 8 whiskies in this Whiskyheroes range. You've got all 8 there. We've got the luxury at Brave New Spirits. There's different ways to buy casks. Some independent bottlers will buy a cask today that they like, and they'll bottle it tomorrow. And it's a great way to operate. But we're lucky. We can taste the cask. If we don't like it, if we don't think it's ready, we don't bottle it. We can leave it in our warehouse. We can decide to re-rack or change the cask. It's a good position to be in. So to select 8 to put a range together, we probably had to taste a lot more casks. It's a terrible job, very hard job to do. This is why they give blenders awards, So
yeah. But we used to, when I started the company 13 years ago, we were used to that we could ask for a list of casks to buy Monday morning at 8 o'clock and get the lists and check them out. Say we would like samples from 20 casks, for instance. A week later, they'll be in the mailbox. And then we could check out and taste them and see what we'd like to buy. These days, you get the list 10 o'clock Monday morning. 30 minutes past 10, it's sold.
Yeah. I mean,
it's going really fast nowadays. It's much faster than it was 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah, and there's definitely a lot more people bottling casks around the world.
I think I see a new bottlers, independent bottlers, almost every week now.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you guys have seen David Sturck's book about independent Scotch. He's written a great book about independent bottlers, mentions a lot of them in the book. But he started writing the book just as Brave New Spirits were starting. So, I mean, I know David. I've worked with him in different countries. I've done whiskey festivals with him a lot. And my copy of the book, which is in our office, has an inscription in the front that says, "I'm really sorry, we didn't manage to get Brave New Spirits in the book this year. Maybe if we can sell enough copies for a second edition, we'll include you the next time." Because there was already so many new independent bottlers, and we were probably one of a few. So,
yeah, but actually, I love this one as well. Nice sherry character.
Well, this is a classic. This is a classic. Speyside by numbers is Speyside Distillery, sherry cask, reasonable age. This is a 13-year-old. It's 1 barrel, 324 bottles. It's a sherry. It's an Oloroso sherry hogshead. So there's quite a lot of ratio of spirit to wood is pretty good. There should be a lot of flavour transfer between the wood and the spirit. And Miltonduff, again, it's one of these distilleries. You don't see a lot of distillery bottlings from Miltonduff. It's a distillery that was used that probably feeds a lot of the blenders. And you probably see more of it coming through independent bottlers than you do the distilleries. So, but it is classic flavour note. I mean, it's Oloroso sherry, which is it's not as sweet as a PX cask.
No, it's more dark, more chocolate.
Yeah, a little bit more chocolatey, a little bit more.
Yeah. Is it full matured in the sherry cask, or is it recasks on a later basis?
We've got this marked as a finished in Oloroso. The front of the bottle will say finish. So cask finish will be probably between 1 and 2 years for us in this. I don't have the exact details in front of me. But it could have been filled into a refill sherry cask at Miltonduff. Again, maybe a lot of their casks were designed to be sold to bottlers. It could have started in an American bourbon refill cask. But first fill Oloroso, by using the first fill Oloroso cask for the finish, you get those nut and the hazelnut and the almond and the sherry complexity flavors can go in quite quickly. The cask's never been used for spirit before.
There's a question, not a question, it's more a comment from Henning. Lots of sulfur for me, he says. I know some whiskey lovers are more sensitive for sulfur than other people. How do you act on that? You don't get too much sulfur in the whiskey.
I know there's people out there. Sulfur is one of these notes. I think certain people in the community can't detect sulfur, and others really detect it. I get a little bit of it, but it's not. I don't think it's detrimental. But some people love sulfur. There's some reviewers out there hate it. I think it's part of the kind of character. The casks, they maybe had sulfur candles going in the cask to kind of get them ready for the whiskey. Maybe the way the distillery, I'm not quite sure how Miltonduff works as a distillery. It's not a distillery I've managed to get into to explore. But sometimes a lot of distilling techniques will give you more of a, the shape of their stills or whatever. You might get different characteristics coming through.
Yeah, I had a bit of chat with Alex on my last visit at your office, and he said that you are going to use more STR casks now for longer maturation to avoid this sulfur.
Yeah, because it divides opinions over, but it's one of those things that's been around the whiskey industry for years, especially with sherry casks. We have, because of the warehouse, we own a warehouse, we can actually buy barrels to experiment with. It's a nice, some of the experiments might not work. Some of them will work spectacularly. So we have sourced SDR casks. We buy casks from cooperages, but also direct from wineries if we have a good relationship with the winery. My own background was, my last distillery that I worked with was one of the Jim Swan clients. So Speyside had used Jim Swan as a consultant, who had also worked with Lindors and McNean and Penderyn, and had been a bit of a champion for SDR casks. And especially if you're working with younger spirit, SDR cask, it's a good way of bringing extra dimensions, extra flavors, without having to go out and get brand new casks, huge expense every time. So I wouldn't do everything in SDR. Alex is our cask guru. Every time I travel with him to a trade show, we lose him, and he's usually off trying to find wineries to see what casks they have. So.
I know Alex is quite fond of the STR. And they're also a bit cheaper than First Fill Oloroso, for instance.
Well, this is it. It's a regenerative SDR cask. They're regenerating casks. So there's, there is there's lots of sustainability things going on. I mean, the whiskey industry was recycling before it was fashionable, because second fill cask, third fill cask, it's a great way to save money because you're not having to buy new casks every time. And STR casks, they give it, it's a great way of giving the barrel a little bit of extra potential, rather than throw it away, or rather than it not being worth using anymore. So.
Yeah, Paul. Sam have a question in the. I don't know if you can read that and maybe answer that.
Getting some fireworks from the, is that the one? Fireworks from the rinsed glass. It could be. You're gonna make me rinse this glass now, so I've got to try it myself. It could be. I mean, most people's frame of reference for sulfur is, in the UK, would be bonfire night, or if you light a match and blow it out. So based on that, yeah, maybe a little bit. I don't have the super sensitive sulfur nose that other people have, but
I just know that some people are very sensitive for the sulfur. So
yeah. Well, there's another comment that they're very sensitive to spice, but they get the spices but no sulfur this time. This is what I love about whiskey. We've got, you can have 20 different people and 20 different opinions. So,
but that's the beauty about whiskey.
Yeah, this is why I like blind tasting panels like this. Rather than maybe, I always like to see the reviews that are coming in when you get a group of people putting the tasting notes together. There's some great whiskey blogs around the world for that now. Because your palate changes not just from person to person, but changes day by day. What you like before lunch might be different from what you like after.
Yeah, it also depends on what you had for dinner first, or have you had a glass of beer or red wine before that, or
exactly.
What mood are you in?
So,
yeah.
Whiskey's a fairly simple product. A couple of ingredients and some time, and it never ceases to amaze me the amount of different combinations. You can have two distilleries very close together, as you get in Speyside. And then you can take the casks and, fill them from the same distillery and have them side by side in the same warehouse for 20 years. And the liquid inside will be completely different from cask to cask.
Yeah.
It's not an exact science. Nobody's ever been able to perfect it. When you fill a barrel, you can't tell what it's going to do for 20 years. We know more about maturation now. We know more about the science of whiskey blending. There's a lot more people coming into the industry that have studied chemistry, for instance. But ultimately, we're dealing with wood, which is a natural product. We're dealing with spirit that doesn't often behave the way you expect it to. So it's a lot of fun. Doesn't matter what theory you have, there's always something coming that'll change it. So.
Cool. So we can agree on disagreeing on sulfur or not. That's basically it.
It's one of those things. There's a whiskey that's coming later on that I think the sulfur comments we just had, we'll get the same about peat, because some people will get the peat and other people won't, because it's not known for being peated. But let's see what they think. So.
I would say I was a bit surprised when I tried the first time.
Excellent. So, for me, this is a classic Speysider. It ticks a lot of the Speyside boxes. This could well be, the sort of, when you go up there for like the Spirit of Speyside Festival and you see this, you go into some of the old distilleries and the bottles on the shelves. This is what I think somebody might have been drinking many years ago in that region. So,
cool. So, should we try the Linkwood?
Yeah.
Do we have that, Paul?
I've got that one here. So Linkwood is the Awakening. Again, another one of those distilleries that you rarely see a distillery bottling from. Probably survived through the lean times in the industry because they had those filling contracts with people like Gordon and MacPhail who would be releasing it. Now the difference here, same region, distillery's not too far apart, but this is 13 years, full maturation in an Oloroso sherry butt. So that's if you're ever doing it, that's the bigger barrel. So probably 500 litres, maybe 550. So there is less liquid. The ratio of liquid to wood contact is different. So, normally the smaller the cask, the greater the interaction between the wood because there's less liquid. Sherry butts are huge. I can fit in a sherry butt, which is, a sight to see if you're ever in the warehouse.
Yeah, and I know there's especially one here in the room that just loved that. And I know the second one as well. I don't know about Paul yet, but I know that at least 2 or 3 of us are just loving this dram.
Well, there is. This is the sherry flavors, I think, are more delicate. The complexity is different because, we're not relying on the cask to, like a finishing cask, we're not relying on it to put the flavours in quickly. They've had a bit more time to develop and soften down. So some of those chocolate flavours have got much more rounded edges. There's a bit more balance, I think. And the other thing, this is 13 years in the sherry cask, not 18 months as a finish. But then the sherry butt is much bigger, so it's not designed to be as fast. But again, it's another classic Speyside, and we're getting into what I would call an evening whiskey. This is a great one. It's summertime in Scotland, which means it's not raining. That's about it. We're still only about 14 degrees today, but this is one of these. Imagine a red leather armchair sitting next to a coal fire on a misty kind of winter's evening, November or December time. This is a great dram to sort of end the night. It's complex, it's grown up.
I just recall when Alex actually sent me the samples the first time from Germany. The sample bottle from the Linkwood was quite fast empty.
And again, it makes me wonder, it's bizarre. I mean, Linkwood, independent bottlers love Linkwood. I think it's very hard to find an independent bottler that doesn't work with Linkwood or doesn't have casks of Linkwood somewhere. Every time I see one, I try and taste it. And you're really disappointed. It's a great distillery. It works. It's very underrated. And I would rank Linkwood as a distillery up there amongst one of the best. But you have to go, we've bottled a few casks of Linkwood for things like whiskey festivals and whatnot, and it's always good. There's a character there, but it doesn't come with the crazy prices that some of the more famous distilleries do. Well worth looking, well worth hunting down if you ever see it. So, which is why I think blenders. I mean, probably the independent bottlers are probably fighting with the blenders for the stock, because I think a lot of Linkwood goes into some very famous blends.
Yeah, I believe so too. I just always loved the good Linkwood, especially on cask strength whiskey. I think the last Linkwood we bottled at Fadandel.dk was first bottled at bourbon cask, and then we saved some in a second fill sherry octave for 6 or 8 months, and it just went totally dark. Two completely different whiskies, but both lovely.
It just works. It's a bit. We've got a Kalila coming up later on, and it works a bit like that. It's one of those whiskies that's versatile.
Yeah, you just can't ruin them.
No, you can use it on a wine cask. You can have sherry cask. You can do re-racks. You can blend it. It's a versatile distillery. But when you taste some of the indie bottles, you wonder if maybe one of these days. It's a distillery. I think it's owned by Diageo, and if they ever decided to this would become one of their key brands. I mean, in Speyside they use Cragganmore as one of their classic malts. If this was to become a classic malt, and they started selling lots and lots of distillery bottlings, which I hope there's always still going to be scope to work with this in the future. It's just a great distillery to play with. So another one that is pretty hard to get in and see, but I'd love to see more of it. So.
Of the distillery or casks of Linkwood?
Both. I'd love to get up and play around in the distillery, but
yeah. There are some comments
The weird thing is, some of these distilleries up there, I mean, we don't have one on the tasting tonight, but some of the distilleries up there, like, Ben Rinnes, you never get in to see it. It's even during Spirit of Speyside, you can't even get a tour out of season unless you knew somebody that worked there. And I think I don't know if anybody was in Scotland for the last Speyside festival, but Tormore as a distillery has just changed owners, and I think this was the first year ever that people could actually get into Tormore to have a look around, and it's on my hit list because you drive past it whenever you drive to Inverness, you drive, or whenever you drive through Speyside, you pass it. It's right on the side of the road. I've always wanted to see it, and you could never get in. The Chivas Brothers company would never, they never did a distillery bottling, and you could never get in for a tour. So.
No, it's the same at one of my favorites, Longmorn Distillery.
Mm-hmm.
You just can't get in.
Yeah. I've spoken to, just after they bought the distillery, I spoke to somebody that works for the company that bought it. And we were at a tasting in Speyside, actually. It was part of the festival 2 years ago. And, so have you actually been in to see it? He goes, yeah. He says, it's not as nice on the inside as it is on the outside. So I think they're trying to change it around now and make it worth a visit. So.
Yeah, but a prime good Scotch distillery, in my opinion, is not clean. It should be a bit moldy and dirty on the floor. The new distilleries are just more show off, in my opinion.
Well, I think a lot of the new distilleries, Brian, the finance model has changed. So a lot of the new distilleries, they know from the start that they would like to show people the distillery. So there's a hospitality aspect, a tourism aspect. There may be a restaurant. These older distilleries, these are from a time when, distilleries were production plants. They were not, people didn't, I still know you still bump into people that worked in distilleries 30 years ago in Scotland. They can't believe that people come here and want to see where they work. They want a tour, because to a lot of people, these are just work sites. They were industrial. They produce spirit that gets moved to blenders, and people, they make things from it. Nobody goes to the bakery and asks for a tour of the oven. So, but the new distilleries, like you say, I mean, if you go, a lot of the new distilleries, they survive until their whiskey is old enough to sell because they can be places to visit. I mean, you can even get married in some of these distilleries. I think the last time I went to see Lindor's distillery in Fife, there was a wedding on. So, what a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question. Is it just me, or is anybody else getting a hint of licorice on the finish? I've added water, by the way.
So you're pouring water in a good whiskey.
I'm gonna let me pull out my tasting notes here.
So in the aftertaste, you mean there's licorice?
The tasting notes we put down when we bought this, there's five. We don't have one person writes the tasting notes. We have 5 or 6 people, so you get a nice little argument of how it happened. And we've got white chocolate. We've got on the website we've written black bun, which for people that grow up in Scotland don't know what black bun is. Black bun is a really, really dense dried fruit crake, but seriously heavyweight, that normally gets given out by a traditional New Year thing in Scotland. And that may well be where the licorice comes from, because it's so dense. It's like the dried fruit almost goes into that sort of, the herbal sort of licorice tang. So,
Paul, could you tell us a bit about the story about the labels on the bottles? By the way, they're not that common. The labels they are actually blended a bit out.
Yeah, well, we from fairly early on, Brave New Spirits, we started doing things with labels. When you have an independent bottler, and you can have some fun. Alex has a background in design. His hobbies over the years, he likes heavy music, and he's a comic book fan. Funnily enough, so am I. I grew up on rock and roll bands. We have a pretty international workforce. Any of our production managers from Hungary. We have people from Germany, Poland, France, all working in the same office. So everybody's got a different background. When we're designing the labels, we don't have a graphic designer. We don't go to one of these expensive agencies who designs the label for us. We sit down and we try and find something that's interesting to put on the label that might be connected to the whiskey. So for some of our whiskies going past, there might be a clue. We might use a slang name for the distillery. If I use this one is an example. This is the Kalila that's coming later, by the way. But we called this Haunting Songs. Now, Kalila is a Gaelic name. It means sound of Isla. If you translate it, Kalila is the sound of Isla. Not sound as in music, but sound as in the water beside it. But we decided the sound could be music, so that's why we called this one the Haunting Songs. So hopefully there's a little link. But there's 5 or 6 of us that throw ideas around. We really wanted to do something, and these are probably the most traditional whiskies we've released, so we're sure that we didn't want to have really traditional labels. There's a lot of people out there. There's a lot of tartan. There's a lot of stags. That's no bad thing, but we wanted to do something a little bit different. And with these being, we called this range the Whiskyheroes because for us, the sherry and the bourbon, that's where whiskey started. That's the hero casks. And we just combined about 5 or 6 different influences together to get the label. So,
okay, cool. Thanks for that, Paul. So, there's more people can taste the liquor. Licorice, sorry. Also liquor, hopefully.
The water thing is good. I'm guilty of doing a lot of single cast tastings without dipping. So bear with me a second. So just a couple of drops. I still think it's quite soft. I still think the strength catches people out. I mean, it's nearly 54%. But if it's well made, if it's well matured, there's no harsh edges there. It might just, the water just takes it down a little bit. But now that somebody has said licorice on the chat bar, I'm definitely seeing it. So.
Yeah, with water, it's okay as well. It's a bit more soft in the finish. But the licorice, I'm sorry, I can't find it. Maybe it's because I've been smoking too many cigarettes. I don't know.
So yes. I mean, I've got, like I say, we had this black bun as a tasting note, which actually, if you ever see a slice of black bun cake in Scotland, it looks like licorice, but it's not. It's dried, super dried fruit. It's very, very compressed. It's, a small slice is actually really heavy, but it packs a lot of it's quite an intense flavor.
Yeah, maybe we should try that next time. Yeah.
You have to go to those kind of old-fashioned traditional bakeries that still make their own. It's weird. It's not something you generally might see it in Scotland at New Year's or Christmas or whatever. So, but it does go very well with certain whiskies.
So I don't know about you, but I'm ready to try this one. The Deep Creatures of the Lake.
Here we go. This is, when I said earlier on there was going to be a whiskey that divided opinion, this is the one I was talking about. This is from Loch Lomond. And we believe that it is.
There's a lot of citrus in the scent.
Loch Lomond can do all the different distilling styles. Loch Lomond, if Roald Dahl rewrote Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and he made it go to a whiskey distillery, he'd probably base it on Loch Lomond. Because Loch Lomond is one of those distilleries that can do lots of different things. They have column stills in there, they have pot stills, they have hybrids, they own a cooperage. It's difficult to get in for a visit because it's not a pretty distillery. In recent years, they've really, really upped their game. The quality of what they've released is amazing. But we've bottled a lot of whiskey from Loch Lomond over the years. Inchfad, a peated style, Inchmurrin, Inchmurrin, Old Rostu, which was released in the start of the millennium and nobody liked it. But if you ever get hold of a 25 or a 30, it's a whiskey that's aged really, really well. And this is Loch Lomond. We've got it marked as peated. The label, Deep Creatures of the Lake, well, you know, Loch Lomond is the deepest loch in Scotland, so there's a little hint there. We've got a two-headed hydra on the label, which is a little nod to the fact that the distillery is a bit of a, you know, a bit of a monster and can do lots and lots of different things. You know, this is a distillery that in many years past, I think they were doing grain whiskey in the pot still. They were doing, you know, malt through the column still, things that you don't see other distilleries doing. Lots and lots of experimentation. And we're back to a first fill bourbon barrel. This is a small batch, so it's more than one cask. It gets to 425 bottles. But please, I'd love to know what you think of this one. To me, there's a very, very light peatiness, which for the Inchmurrin style of whiskey produced by Loch Lomond isn't usually peaty, but we have found in the past peated Inchmurrins. But we're back to bourbon casks, so there should be vanilla. Somebody's already said it, vanilla, grass, citrus, apples. But then you get a little tropical note, maybe a little bit of smoke. To me, there's a little bit of smoke. Somebody's mentioned it on the chat line, I can see. So I know I'm not alone, but we did a tasting. We were at the Campbelltown Festival last week. Now that we've got a distillery coming in Campbelltown, we went down and we did the open day at What Whisky, which was great. So there was a lot of indie bottlers in the same room. Fantastic. Great day out. And about 50% of the people didn't say it was peated. So
the peat is a bit hidden in the end. You need to look deep in the glass and you'll find the peat, I think.
It gets me at the very, just once you've had a sip and you've swallowed it, the kind of backdraft is where the smoke is.
Yeah.
But there, I'm looking at the chat column, and I can see somebody says smoke and vanilla, and then 2 comments down it says I wouldn't have said peat for this one. So this is why I said it would divide opinion. We're going to start an argument with it, but that's what whiskey's for.
Exactly. Slanty, Paul.
Thanks, guys. Cheers. Good point, actually. You don't get peaty, but definitely smoke. Again, if you'd said peat, I wouldn't have said Islay style peat. This is more, to me, if you get the peated whiskies from, you know, if you go up north and you find some of the peated whiskies up there, it's more of a, you know, it's not peat that's made from compressed seaweed and algae and things like that. It's peat that comes from inland. So the iodine and the iodine character on there, but maybe the smoke is still evident. So
it's a lovely dram, and I have to say that.
I think it's great. Loch Lomond is another one of those distilleries that's really underrated. You know, for years. I mean, Loch Lomond's got new owners. They got new owners a few years ago, and I think they're actually letting the people there do what they always wanted to do. You know, they're making great whiskies. They've invested tons of money to develop it. For a while, you know, at the end of the 90s, I think Loch Lomond was doing a lot of very average malts that they were selling to supermarkets for low cost. Probably kept the distillery alive, but it wasn't putting the distillery in that high echelon of premium, if you like. That's all changed now. The stuff they're doing is amazing. If you look at the awards they're getting, the reviews they're getting around the world, you know, the same company owns Glen Scotia, so they've got the Campbelltown connection as well, which is fantastic. So,
yeah, Paul, have you tried to add just a drop or 2 of water in the glass? You actually get the peat more in the nose.
Oh, let me play. Thank you for the tip. If I can work my little pipette. Yeah, these glass pipettes are really nice, and I think I got this free from a magazine somewhere. It says Whisky Magazine on it. But they're not as good as the little squidgy ones.
I'll send you some. I have plenty of those.
The little squidgy ones are brilliant. They're so cheap and they work. You know, the glass ones are lovely and ornate.
I know they're quite cheap, but they work every time. Paul, there's somebody is asking here. Stefan is asking, are they still making the Croft-Tage?
The Croft and G. Do you know what? I don't know if they're still doing it, still making it. There is. I see. There's still. I still see Croft and G casks being bottled. So there are casks in warehouses that haven't been bottled yet. Whether or not they still produce that particular style, I have no idea.
No, you see them from time to time. You see the casks floating around from time to time, but I haven't seen any younger one recently.
No. But it's a perfect one to use as an example because Loch Lomond, you know, I mean, if you had a distillery that had the capability to do all this weird stuff, why would you not? You know, we bottled one of the first things we ever did when I got to Brave New Spirits is we bottled an old Rostu, a 28-year-old, and it was stunning. It got, I think Serge on Whisky Fun gave it a 95. You know, we're like, whoa, we'd never had a whiskey reviewed on Whisky Fun at that point. So to get that was amazing. You know, every time I find something from every time I see the Loch Lomond guys, I love to talk to them because they've always got something good going on, you know. And it's a high volume distillery, so they still happily working with independent bottlers, which is brilliant. So
yeah, right. And one comment is, it is weird. I believe he means that the dram is weird. Not you.
This one or the Croft and Gia? So somebody said the weird Croft and Gia.
Okay.
But I'm trying to read the chat bar, but it might be because the whiskey's starting to hit me. So either that or my. Yeah, I don't know if that comment refers to the Croft and Gia in the comment above, but I haven't tasted enough Croft and Gia. It's one of those ones. Whenever I'm at a whiskey festival, and remember when COVID arrived, we didn't do whiskey festivals in person, so I couldn't walk around and find stuff. We're doing it again now, which is great. And I'll spend half the time at a whiskey festival without, you know, trying not to work while I go off to try other people's whiskies. So yeah, it's the Croft and Gia. I think we've got casks of it sitting somewhere. We've never bottled any for ourselves, but I need to pull some samples to see what we can do with it. So.
Yeah, I'll come over Monday and we can try some.
That sounds like a lot. Like I say, it's a tough day in the office when we. Is it Tuesday? I went in. You've known Alex for a while, Brian. We're doing independent bottling on a fairly large scale. We released about 75. We bottled about 75 different single casks last year. And you know, Alex comes over to Scotland, and we'll do a tasting, and we'll sit down, and it'll be, you know, the conversation will usually start like, "Do you have half an hour? We can try a couple of samples." And, you know, 4 hours later, we're probably still sitting there. I went to the office. I drove from our little rented office up to the warehouse today to get something, and there was a box under the table. I think there was 20 samples in it, and it's for the next releases of Whiskyheroes that we're planning. But on Tuesday now, I'm going to have to leave my car at home and go. There'll be 4 or 5 of us sitting down, and we'll start tasting through these to try and find stuff to release next. But you know, yeah. But the message I got said, "Oh, if you get to the office, there's a sample box under the table for you." Look, and I'm thinking, "Oh, maybe there's 1 or 2 bottles in it." There's not. There's 22 or something. So yeah, if I go missing next Tuesday, you know why. So
yeah, but you know, it's a hard job, but somebody got to do it.
Yeah, luckily our warehouse isn't that far from where I live. Actually, I can walk home from there. I think I live closer to the warehouse than anybody else that works there. Just by sheer coincidence, I live nearby where they bought the warehouse. Which I worked for the company before they bought the warehouse. I couldn't believe it when they decided that was where they were going to put it. So yeah, if I don't return on Tuesday, have a dram for me, and hopefully, I'll surface it maybe Thursday or Friday that week. So, but I do hope people liked it. It's weird and funky, but it's proof that every bourbon cask whiskey doesn't need to be the same. So.
Yeah, but sometimes you just need some funky stuff.
Exactly.
So should we try the next one, Defender of the Crown, also named
indeed.
Annandale Distillery?
Yeah, sounds good. That's another one I get to break the seal on. Now this is an interesting.
Oh, you got a brand new one.
Yeah, I got a new one.
Lucky you.
Well, the thing is, there's I think there's a whiskey festival up here. There's a lot of whiskey festivals in Scotland, so we've got a whiskey festival in England, north of England, I think in July. If this bottle's still around by then, if you get there and I've already drunk half of it, that's the reason. It's research, honest. Defender of the Crown. So we do a lot of bottlings.
Paul,
we do a lot of bottlings.
Just a quick question for you. Sorry. Sorry to interrupt you, mate. Why is it the seal is opening the other way around the bottle than normal bottles are?
You know what? I didn't notice.
I got you there.
It's terrible when you have somebody from a whiskey company on. I didn't notice that. Often because the whiskies we have in the warehouse don't have the seal on them. But also, if somebody asks me what they cost, I feel really bad because, it's terrible when you either get them off your friends or you try and get them at a special deal. But I hadn't even thought of that. We went looking for these capsules. We needed to find somebody that could do the animations on them. So it may be that the seal was just, I've never noticed. It's for left-handed people. That's what it's for.
I mean, maybe the seals are from China. That's the other way around. Possibly.
I know the company that did the seals for us, and we use them for other products. But I had never noticed that they were. My own family, my father and my grandfather are both left-handers. Now, I'm right-handed, but my importer in Japan, I went for a meal with our importer in Japan a few years ago, and he spotted that I was using my left hand on the cutlery. And he said, "Oh, are you a lefty?" I said, "No, I didn't notice that the capsule opened the other way." But maybe my left-handed genetics somewhere down the line from the granddad.
Yeah, but I just noticed that when I poured all the drams for this tasting for people sitting out in the living rooms, that it was quite strange that it didn't work the normal way.
That's brilliant. You're the first person that's mentioned it. I've never seen that before. But I've got one more to open, and I'm going to check.
Yeah, please ask Alex about that.
Yeah, no. I think the crucial thing, as long as we can get into the bottle, that's the important.
Exactly. So, you're trying to say something about Annandale before I interrupted you.
Yeah. Interesting distillery. I said earlier on, we try and do stuff with classic distilleries, but we try not to replicate the distillery bottlings. That's fine. That's great when you're working with Daoyuan or Blair Athol, these big distilleries that everybody's been. This is the first time we've bottled anything from Annandale. It's a new distillery. This is an 8-year-old. And Annandale is, so they do release distillery bottlings, mainly single casks, mainly high strength. So, but again, because it's a new distillery, we thought this would be fun to put in the range, because Annandale do two styles of whiskey. They do a peated and an unpeated, and there is not a lot of Annandale casks with indie bottlers at the moment. They're starting to get out there, but we got this one from them. It's a first fill Oloroso sherry, but it's their peated malt rather than their unpeated. And we just thought it would be really cool to have it in the range, so that the range wasn't just big legendary distilleries. This is something a little bit different. It's a bit like we've got a grain in the range, we've got a young whiskey in the range. I could see a comment about this one being very sulfur. I could get the sulfur on this one. but not in a very good way. Oh, okay. See, we like this. We think there's a bit of complexity there that we don't have on the other ones. Sulfur is definitely there. I don't think it's a detriment.
No, again, some people have mentioned the sulfur in the comments.
I think
I'm
the
not sure.
smoky. I think the
I'm
smoky
not sure
aroma
I
disappears
can
once you've
sense the
had the first
sulfur, but
taste.
I can definitely sense the dark sherry.
Yeah, and we're on a first fill cask again, so probably quite. We can't tell what an old Annandale cask would be like because the distillery, I think, is only 8 or 9 years old. So this is probably from the early days of the distillery. I mean, the distillery's been there for a long time, but it really only resurrected not that long ago.
Is it still full matured for all 8 years in this sherry barrel?
Yes, we've not got this marked as a finish. So this is a sherry. I mean, Annandale, if you visit, it's a great distillery to visit and tour.
Yeah, I've been there a couple of times.
Yeah, and they spend a lot of money buying good casks. So they've got warehouses full. So this is, a cask that we've sourced from them. We didn't choose the cask. We didn't buy it as new make and put it in our own cask. We've tasted a few casks with them. This is a cask we chose. We thought it was good to bottle now. We wanted to see what the response was because, it's great using wine casks that nobody's used before, especially on classic distilleries, but it's also good to use a distillery that we do like trying to work with distilleries that we've never worked with before. The Secret Speyside from earlier on is the first cask we've ever bottled from that distillery, and this is the first cask we've ever bottled from Annandale. So in a range of only 8 whiskies, you've got 2 that even are new to us. So and we have got a few different Annandale casks now, so you will see different. Maybe we'll let some age a little bit longer. We might re-rack some from bourbon into sherry or from sherry into wine casks. So in the years to come, you'll see some different things coming. But the fact that the distillery itself has peated and unpeated spirit is interesting to us because we can get 2 different characteristics straight away.
I think I agree about the sulfur if you add some water in this dram. So don't do that.
Don't. The comment there from Stefan, yeah, the rotten eggs is a classic sulfury note. I think once you've taken the first sip, it dissipates a wee bit. Once your taste buds have warmed up to it, you don't get as much of the aroma. But I uncorked that. I broke the seal on that one, and I got it straight away because it had been, it's not had any exposure outside the bottle. It's straight into the glass. So maybe it's a little bit more forceful than me, but
yeah.
But again, it's another one of these ones that we think divides opinions, but we don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. We like to see the differences, and it was just it's a good chance. 1, it's Lowland. 2, it's a distillery that not many people have worked with, and we really liked what the cask had done. First fill, it's only 8 years old, but you can see that the cask already given it lots and lots of colour. And clearly giving it lots of flavours from the cask.
Yeah, you can actually see the colour of the bottle is quite dark.
I think it's actually one of the darkest in the range. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe the Caol submission is also quite dark.
Mm-hmm. But with PX casks, you tend to be much darker. PX sherry is a lot,
Yeah.
more syrupy and dark. So,
but the darkness is good. People like dark whiskey,
and it's natural. It's funny. I mean, I work quite a lot. We do a lot of work in Asia. It's a big. There's countries out there where the whiskey knowledge is great. They love, but for many years, the only whiskies they had access to were the very famous, Johnny Walker, all these amazing names. Now they're starting to look at small producers, small distilleries, independent bottlers. Countries like Taiwan and Korea are really coming on, new generations of whiskey drinkers. And but the generation gap, and we see it in Scotland even. where, you know, people prefer the dark whiskey. It might not even be, you know, you can use caramel. Somebody like Johnny Walker, they've got to make sure every single bottle they sell around the world looks and tastes the same, has the same texture, doesn't, you know. But, you know, if you put a pale whiskey down in front of somebody, sometimes they walk away, and maybe they shouldn't. You know, it's the color should be my own belief is the color should be a natural side effect, and nothing that we've ever bottled here, we've changed the color on. I know in certain parts of the world the dark whiskies are more popular, but we had a refill bourbon cask Secret Speyside earlier on, which was absolutely gorgeous. But I know if we had that in a tasting panel in some parts of the world and didn't put labels on it, that would be the one that people tasted last.
Yeah. Actually, I just remembered another visit I had in Scotland in April. We tried a 59 years old single grain. Been in the same first fill barrel for all 59 years. It was absolutely stunning, the color, and it was just about that color as well. It tasted like, and not tasted, but the sense of the whiskey was so intense, like extreme bubble gum.
Yeah.
It was so delicious. I can't tell you where I tried it, but I'll show you next time.
And that's the thing with indie bottlers. You know, I don't know of an indie bottler where, you know, we tend not to bottle at 40% or 43%, where, you know, we taste the cask. We, you know, sometimes we'll dilute, but we'll dilute to a flavor what we would class as the optimum flavor. It's not designed by the tax man, shall we say. You know, you pay more tax to bottle at 55%, but if the flavor justifies it, then we do it. And likewise, we tend not to change the color. You know, when I go into the supermarket and you see supermarket blended whiskey, 3 years old, and it's that color, you know, just because if it was the natural color of a 3-year-old blend, nobody would buy it. It's a shame because the whiskey can be quite good, you know.
Yeah, but you know, you eat with your eyes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So sometimes it's just more more likely you'll take a darker whiskey from the cabin than you'll take a light whiskey. Even through you know that the light whiskey would maybe your favorite.
Yeah, and I think the whiskey industry is learning as we go, especially on the marketing. And I think, you know, 20, 30 years ago, we were trying to play catch up, and, you know, fine wine always had a real rich color. Cognac was, you know, and I think, you know, it was just, I always grew up thinking whiskey was dark brown. It was only when I started working with distilleries, and I went to Arran Distillery, was one of the first distilleries I ever visited. And you're like, oh, wow. And then I did some work with Bruichladdich, and they championed the non-chill filtration message, which got very difficult because if you live in a cold country, or you leave the bottle in the car overnight and you take it out and it's gone cloudy, that doesn't mean the whiskey's bad. It's just natural. It's, you know.
Yeah, it's the natural oil in the whiskies.
Exactly. But it used to happen a lot. We sold a lot of Bruichladdich to supermarkets, and people would be buying it as a gift. But in December, the supermarkets' warehouses are freezing cold. So the whiskey, when you took it out of the jar, was cloudy, and they thought it wasn't whiskey people that were buying it. And they thought, oh, why is this whiskey? Oh, no, there must be something wrong with it. We'll take it back to the store. So Bruichladdich had to put a little leaflet inside the gift can to tell people that this is a natural phenomenon. And when it's at room temperature, it's fine. So,
yeah, the first time I bottled a cask in Scotland, it was in the middle of December. It was -3 degrees outside. So when we emptied the cask and tried it the first time in the warehouse, it was just tasting like water.
uh-huh.
So my first thought was that, okay, this is not the first time I spilled money on whiskey. But luckily, when we got the bottles home to Denmark and we tried it at room temperature, it tasted just lovely.
But yeah, even now, I mean, 20 years ago versus now. So I've been in this. I've been working with whiskies now for over 20 years, I think. But the knowledge is great now because people now know that the reason a lot of whiskies are bottled at 46% and not 40 is because at 46 you can the structure changes, the non-chill filtration can be a thing, and they understand that if the whiskey goes cloudy, that's normal. The knowledge out there is better, and it was companies like Bruichladdich and maybe Benriach and Glendronach, and then people becoming more interested in some of the distilleries like Glenfarclas. Again, were not. They weren't tweaking the whiskey or adjusting it to suit an accountant. So, if it was bottled at cask strength, it was bottled at cask strength. So you pay more tax, but maybe it's worth paying the extra tax to try it. And then if you want to dilute it to what suits you rather than what suits us, you're absolutely allowed to do it. So.
Yeah, but have you tried to take a cask strength whiskey, non-chill filtered whiskey, and lower it down to below 40 to see what happens?
We haven't yet. We often get, and it happened this week actually. We get phone calls in the warehouse from people that own casks in various warehouses, and they're getting to that stage where the cask is close to not being whiskey anymore. So, we've got some. You'll get a phone call that says, "Oh, we've got somebody that has a cask in such and such a warehouse. It's at 43% already." And you're like, "Well, maybe got another couple of years, but they're going to have to get that bottled quickly." Because hilariously, in that case, 43% would still be classed as cask strength, because that's the natural strength in the barrel. But we've never lowered it down to below 40.
No, but you can't. But you can't call it whiskey if you lower it down to below 40. That's the first rule. But second of all, if you take a cask strength whiskey and lower it down to 40 ABV, you will actually see the cloudness in the whiskey quite often.
Really? I'm familiar with the cold warehouse and the cold boot of the car. But yeah, I mean, we've never gone below 40. We have some blended whiskey that we buy and we sell in different parts of the world as for supermarkets, and that's at 40%. But for the market, that is, it's 40%. It's stabilized. It scares me when you see casks and you get the yearly, or you get the report through, and it's getting close to that. It usually happens on much older whiskies, not stuff that we see every day at Brave New Spirits, unfortunately. But I know some of those casks that have hit the market have been bottles. It might be 50, 60, 70 years old single malt. And you're like, oh, that's great. And it's at 42%. You're like, well, they really needed to bottle that. If they tried to let it get to another 5 years, they would have lost that. But unfortunately, they're usually at prices that are way beyond what I can afford. So,
yeah, it don't get cheaper by age. Nope.
That's another reason I like grain whiskey. You can buy 30-year-old grain whiskey and it's still affordable. You can still afford to open it and drink it, which is
correct.
30-year-old single malt now. Often, anybody that flies through the airports and sees what some of these distilleries can charge. I mean, I don't know. I'd feel terrible if I bought a whiskey that was over £1,000 a bottle and opened it and didn't like it.
Yeah. So should we go to the hunting songs?
Yep. There we go. And I get to try this thing with the capsule now, Brian. So I'm going to sit in the office tomorrow and open all the other bottles to see if it goes that way.
Yeah, you need to open every bottle to check.
Alex is going to walk in and there's going to be no bottles that we can sell because I've opened all of them. Okay.
Maybe you should call Adam first and tell him to be forced to be sick.
Well, what I'll do is, if Adam asks, I'll just tell him Alex said it was okay. and vice versa. Yes, so great distillery. We are on small batch, not single cask here. This is finished in Oloroso sherry hogsheads.
Okay, so both of the cask has been matured into this first fill hogshead and then finished there, or?
Yeah, this is a finish. So we've put this in the hogshead, the sherry hogsheads, to put some sherry notes on this. It's from Caol Distillery. For anybody that's ever done the tours of the distilleries on Islay, it's the biggest distillery there, 9.8 million litres a year or something like that. It's a great distillery for indie bottlers to work with because, I mean, Islay is one of those. It's the Islay Festival this week. There's a lot of people on Islay right now trying to get Ardbeg Festival bottles and stuff like that. Caol is the big daddy of Islay whiskey. It's the biggest distillery there. There are probably not a lot of other distilleries that supply independent bottlers. So most independent bottlers I know can source Caol. In terms of the peatiness and the smokiness, Caol sits pretty much bang in the middle. So you've got Bruichladdich and Buna at the milder end, and then at the really fiery peaty end, you've got Laphroaig and Ardbeg. And Caol sits right in the middle. But by doing that, it works really well for blenders. This is a distillery that Diageo themselves use to feed into a lot of their blends. So it's got that flexibility. Works with bourbon casks, works with sherry casks, works with wine casks. We've done some great wine finishes with this, using old Bordeaux casks and stuff. But hopefully,
I think in Johnny Walker, there's a lot of Caol.
Yeah. I think the smokier Johnny Walkers, probably large chunk of that peat smoke is coming straight out of Caol. But this one, I think, works really well. It's creamy. It's bottled at 52.6%, so it's a small batch. So we've slightly diluted this one, I think, for flavour. But I could just sit on the nose for that for ages. It's not fierce. The smoke doesn't overbear the flavours that are coming from the sherry cask. It's not hiding any of the fruit. It doesn't get in the way. And it hangs around for a decent amount of time, but it's like those party guests that knows when to leave. So
just a lovely Caol on sherry.
Like ice cream.
I think we all in this room agree about that, I think.
Yeah.
Even the cameraman is shaking his head.
It's funny because there's a great tasting note just came up there, like ice cream at the hospital. If any of you are in a tasting in the future and you see that as a tasting note on one of our bottles, then please don't chase us for royalties, because I'd love to use that somewhere. Ice cream at the hospital sounds like an amazing description. But you're right. There is a creaminess there, probably from the original bourbon cask. And then the Oloroso sherry cask starts throwing kind of hazelnuts and sultanas and stuff in there. Let me see what I've got our own tasting notes on the website, and I'll see what it says. And that one.
We have an audience outside this room. He loves Caol. I would like to see what he thinks about that.
Well, we've got the tasting note we have for this, when we put the 5 or 6 of us in the room. We've got bonfire kelp, which is seaweed, kumquat, which is the really small citrusy oranges, dark chocolate, raspberry, pink peppercorns, and red snapper, which is a type of fish, I think. So the tasting notes are everywhere. So ice cream. I
see Rasmus, he likes it quite well.
Yeah. Ice cream at the hospital is great. And one of the team that we work with, we have for anybody that's ever been to Islay, hopefully a few of you have, if anybody ever toured Caol a couple of years ago, you might have met a lady called Justina. You did a lot of the visitor centre management, the tour guiding and things like that, and a lot of their marketing. She works with us now. She joined us about a year ago. So she moved from Islay to Glasgow. She's originally from Lithuania, but she's lived on Islay for well over 10 years, I think. And she is like our little go-to for anything peated in Islay. We let her taste the new. I managed to get a sample of the new Ardnahoe release a couple of weeks ago. There was a tasting in the local whiskey store. But
I think the first time I visited Caol, we were actually brought welcome with distiller edition and some oysters.
Mm-hmm.
That was quite nice.
This is what I like about Scotland. The weird thing about Scotland is we have some of the best seafood in the world, but we rarely see much of it here because, like the whiskey, we probably sell more of it into other countries. So, if you live in the city, Glasgow, Edinburgh, oysters, to get oysters in a restaurant, you've got to go to an expensive one and pay a lot of money. But if you go to Islay, if you go to Oban, you go to any of the cities, Campbelltown, you get like scallops and oysters and delicacies straight off the boat. Langoustines, amazing, incredible stuff, and they all work really well with whiskey. I've seen scallops sort of with a whiskey glaze and things like that, and it's awesome. And this is a whiskey that works really well with food. It's not overbearing.
Yeah, and also you should try this search. I learned back in start 2000, I think, some good vanilla ice cream,
mm-hmm.
and a few drops of Caol or whatever you have. But Caol is working quite well. On top of that, vanilla ice cream and some fresh black pepper.
Uh-huh.
That's just going to explode in your mouth.
That sounds great. And it is. It's great. There are certain whiskies on Islay. They are legends, and they're legends for a reason. They're superb, but they're not as flexible in terms of what you can mix with them with food. My first experience in Islay, it was like a sort of first week in January, I think about 2006, 2007. We were at Bowmore, my first Islay distillery visit. And the tour guide, it was like a crazy storm, gale force. The ferries were stopped. The weather was that bad. So we have that horizontal rain in Scotland. It was like that stings your face when it hits you. And the guide told us to go outside and stand on the wall with your dram and knock the dram back, and then you breathe in and you get that salt sea spray, and it was incredible. It's an experience I've never forgotten. And that was at Bowmore. We can never. It's really hard to get hold of Bowmore as an independent bottling. Has been for years, but we think this works really well. And I can imagine sitting on the beach drinking this one, just as the sun goes down. It's and on not Hawaii, but on the Scottish beach where it's cold. The kind of beach you have to still wear a jacket.
Yeah, but I know that Caol casks are going up in currency and in money, but the Bowmore is even more expensive nowadays.
Yeah, I mean, and there's very few. I mean, I don't know whether Ardnahoe will be one of these ones that supplies independent bottlers or the new. I mean, but Ardnahoe is only 5 years old. Kalila's not very. Kilhoman's not really big enough to be supplying a lot of stuff out to independents. The Kalila is probably the only distillery left on Islay that regularly you'll see as an independent bottling, unless you spend a lot of money. As you say, Bowmore casks and bottles are crazily expensive. So, but the whiskey industry is a strange beast that way. I mean, we saw it in Campbelltown as well. You can every time Springbank say there's a new release, there's a bit of a flurry, and then you hardly, it's gone.
Yeah, the Springbank bottles are becoming very, very expensive in Denmark as well.
Yeah, expensive or just really hard to find because they don't have a massive production. So you don't, the shops only get a limited amount. People buy them and they hide them and you never see them again. So,
I know a guy that do like that. I don't know. Do you know him? Well, there's actually a comment here in saying that I'm normally against tasting peated whiskies, but this one pleasantly surprised me. So thank you for releasing that.
Thank you very much. This is it. I mean, funny, when you do a lot of tastings and people tell you they don't like peated whiskey, usually it's because, I mean, the thing in Scotland, you know, weirdly, everybody in Scotland tastes the wrong whiskey first. So you might have been, a young kid in Scotland. And it was, a New Year's party in your parents' house, and somebody left the whiskey. You sneak a sip of Grandad's dram, and it burns your mouth and puts you off whiskey for years because he was probably drinking something horrible. When you actually start exploring it, and you start seeing the differences you get from different distilleries, that's when you find that actually the different flavors, it's a lot of fun, and you find things that fit. And the Kalila just seems to work, so many different Kalilas. If you look at the reviews, they usually get great reviews. I think, hopefully it doesn't become too expensive that it prices itself out of the market. But we can only see, because there's more and more people, with it being the one that most people get hold of, it's the one that's in demand, because, you can't get Ardbeg, you can't get Lefroy much anymore. So
yeah, luckily we can still get casks at a decent price, but the prices of especially Caol has gone up the last 3-4 years. But it seems like the cask industry has found out that it's top of the bench now, so it's flattened out a bit. So that's a good thing, I think.
I mean, it's one of those weird things. I try not to look at. I love talking to people that drink whiskey because they like it, not because they're seeing it as a commodity and it's an investable thing. But the world economy is kind of doing silly things at the moment, and whiskey is reflecting that. I think I'm sure there's indexes out there where some of those bottles that were selling on auctions for thousands of pounds last year aren't selling as quickly as they were this year. Yeah. Because people are being more careful about their money. So it's a way, I think we just need to keep watching the market, trying to find things, taste things whenever we can, do events like this, or go to whiskey festivals and try and find your next favorite dram, So
exactly. As I told you earlier, it's a hard job, but somebody got to do it.
Absolutely. I mean, I got a whiskey festival in London this Sunday, and it's quite a lot of different producers are being at the same event. So it's going to be the first one for a couple of months when I'll be able to go wandering around and trying to find my next favourite dram. There's distilleries that will be there, a lot of these new distilleries that I've not seen at festivals before. So some of the English distilleries, Dunfale and things like that, some of the new Scottish ones. And I'm so keen to try them because I want to see if I can find what my next favourite dram is going to be. And also if some of these distilleries might let us have a couple of casks to put in our warehouse. So. Yeah,
the English distilleries are upcoming, as I see it. And there's a lot of them.
There is a lot of them. It's good. I've not tasted enough of them. The ones I have tasted, I mean, I think Whisky Magazine said the best whiskey of the year this year was from the English distillery. And I've tasted their whiskies before, and they're very good. And I used to have the same importer. In my last company, I used to have the same importer as Cotswolds, which again is some great things coming from that distillery as well. So it's an area I want to explore a bit more. At the moment, there's still not enough distilleries in England to do a tour. The way you go to Speyside, you just get a taxi from one distillery to the next one. 5 minutes down the road, there's another distillery.
Exactly. Yeah. You're going to Speyside next time, I think.
I like that kind of thing.
Okay. Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you for your time. We almost made it in time. We at least a bit forward here. So if der nogle spørgsmål ude i foret, så stil dem endelig. Vi kan eventuelt slå mikrofonerne til, så vi kan få folk til at spørge direkte i stedet for. Jeg får lige Cameronmanden til at slå det til, så I kan gøre det.
Har vi nogle favoritter?
Ja, er der nogle favoritter? Er der nogle absolutely dislikes? Alle kommentarer er velkommen. Lad os høre fra jer. Nobody wants to talk.
I'll go ahead and start with the second one, the Adventures in the Meadow. That was my favorite.
Yeah.
The Unnamed.
Yeah.
That's a bit of a favorite for me, actually. For an unpeated whiskey, it was the surprise, but again, it's great because it's not a distillery we've bottled before. It's one I hope we can bottle in future as well. So, what kind of shops, supermarkets might stock these bottles down in Central England? Sorry, I'm reading the chat line. Right, Central England. Let me think. One, we don't. These are small batch or single cask, so you tend not to see whiskies like this in a supermarket. If you've got a good whiskey specialist store in the town, then that would probably be your best point of call. They'll probably have distillery whiskies from distilleries like this. I know, for instance, in Nottingham, if you're near the Midlands, Gauntleys in Nottingham have got these whiskies. Some of the good whiskey shops in London, like Hedonism, the Vintage House, you'll find them there. But they wouldn't be in a Tesco or an Asda just because we don't produce enough quantity to go around. They're limited. So for companies like us, we rely on specialists in every country, people that understand the whiskey. And I think that's the best audience for it. So. Master Malt's a good website to use. We're not on Master Malt yet with these, but if you did a web search in the UK, you'll find a few shops that have got them. So
at least you'll find EP in Denmark.
Yeah, and I can recommend a really good place in Denmark. So
absolutely,
a couple of good places in Denmark. In fact, more of this whiskey went abroad than stayed in the UK. It's quite the nature of it. When we announced the range, so I think Denmark's probably the closest country to Scotland that has this whiskey. It's in Germany, it's in China, it's in Korea.
Didn't you send some to France, I think, or Germany, wasn't it?
We've got some in Germany. It's not in France yet. Korea, Asia. In Europe, it's Germany, Austria. You have it in Denmark. I think some of it's gone to Sweden.
I think I saw them on Systembolaget recently.
Yeah, they've gone in. We again, it's another part of the world that's good for independent bottlers. I know the Blackadder guys really well, and they introduced us to somebody they knew, and the conversation started from there. So, it's especially with whiskies in small quantities like this. Supermarkets tend to like whiskies that are always going to be on the shelf for the whole year round, whereas these might sit on a shop for a couple of weeks and then they're gone, and then we have to bring the next range and that's good. So for the people that didn't like the Annandale tonight, hang on, because there might be something along in 3 months' time that's really different. What we can never do with whiskies like this is guarantee that they're always going to be available for the full year, or if you went to the store next year to find this bottle, then it wouldn't exist. But that's the fun. That's the fun and the peril of indie bottling. So,
do you plan on doing annual releases or?
Nice.
We probably not even annual. We might do a couple of batches a year. I mean, the response to this range has been really good. Whenever you do a new brand, it always goes a little bit faster as everybody gets hold of it. But we're already looking. I mean, we kind of unveiled it in March, April. We're already looking at the next batch, so you might see 2 releases a year. But I'll keep in touch with Brian, is things like that, because, when you do decide what you're bottling, you've then got to schedule in the slot to get it into the bottling hall. You've got to make sure that you get the boxes and the bottles ordered. Because that's the other thing.
It's always a bit of a process to get a series out, even a single cask bottling. It can take from 2 to 3 weeks to months, depending on the warehouse where the casks are.
Yeah, and then things like the stoppers, the capsules, the labels. Sometimes the packaging can take longer to source than you can have the whiskey in the bottle, but you're waiting for two months to get the capsules and the corks. So. But my plan on this one, and I really hope it goes ahead, is we'll have more than one release a year of this. We're not structured enough to do, you get the guys that do a spring release and an autumn release. We'll do a release and then we watch how it sells, and we will have the next batch ready as this one starts to sell out, so that there's never a gap.
So any other questions from the audience?
I can see a comment.
I have not much as a question, but maybe recognition. I think you're doing a great job. Thank you, Paul, for releasing these. It's been quite amusing and educational to hear you and talk with you. But do like 4 or 5 of them really much. Do you only do cask strength, or also watered down, or how is your
no? Range? I mean, we have quite a big range of whiskies, and every country is going to be a little bit different. So we are new to Denmark. It's great that Brian's taken these whiskies in, and Brian and Alex and I will have discussions over the weeks and months ahead, and we can see what whiskies we think would work for you guys in future as well. So most of what my side of the business does is cask strength, single cask. But again, that could be still, depending on the cask, that could be less than 50% ABV. So it's never, once we taste it, once we decide what we're bottling strength at, we've done single cask bottlings as low as kind of 48%, but it depends on the cask. Right up to 60. I think we've done one at 63, which ruled us out in some countries, because if you go above 60 in Norway, for instance, you're not allowed to sell it. So
yeah, in Norway it would be like narcotics, in fact.
Yeah, and I think it's Vietnam or the Philippines that it's 50. So they class it as a chemical. So,
but you don't water anything down.
Some of the bottlings we've done. Mainly the small batch ones, but some of the bottlings we've done in other ranges, we might opt to dilute it down. It might be at 58 from the cask, but we think it works better at 56. We don't do it often, but we can do it. But every single bottling is going to be a little bit different. It's all decided on. Again, we're small enough to actually work on every single bottling. Pretty much everybody in our office has tasted every single bottling we've done. And that's kind of good.
Sorry, I'm going to talk to Dennis, Paul. Sorry. Sam, du spørger efter, hvor du kan købe flaskerne henne. Det kan du i vores butik. Du kan det på vores online shop, og så kan man købe dem hos Whisky.dk også. Det er de 2 eneste butikker i Danmark, du kan få den her range PT. And back to you, Paul.
Okay, no, excellent. Happy to take any more. Thank you so much for the comments, folks, and thank you for the amazing comments.
It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure. I
just
hope that people are liking the whiskies as much as we are around the table here. Even the cameraman, I think he needs a bed for the night. But we'll figure that out. I think it's been a pleasant evening. Nice to hear your talk about the whiskies, what you've been doing, etc., etc. Always nice to hear a new story. So I hope the people around in the Danish living rooms and Sweden and where else we have sent these samples have enjoyed as much as we have. At least it would be nice to hear if you have enjoyed. Some of you have made some great comments under the tasting here, and keep it coming and send me an email afterwards if you want to plus and minus what you think about the tasting here, the event. Yeah, Paul, do you have anything?
It's super. So to see so many people that would give up a couple of hours of a I know how busy everybody is to come online to support businesses like this. It's good. You know, through the lockdown and the COVID, it was you know, businesses like Fadandel that kind of kept us all going. We started doing virtual tastings because we couldn't leave the house, we couldn't travel to other countries. And if you guys weren't supporting businesses like this, then we wouldn't be able to do this. So thank you very much to everybody. So.
Absolut. Jeg kan kun understøtte det, Paul han siger, at det er dejligt at se så mange mennesker. Vi har solgt omkring 50 sæt til i aften. Det er langt over, hvad jeg havde forventet, vi ville sælge til i aften til en online smagning, men det er absolut ikke sidste gang, vi gør det her. Jeg håber, at I næste gang vil joine os også. Vi har snakket blandt andet med Claxtons om at lave en session eller det her, sådan at vi kan prøve at lave en smagning med nogle af deres.
Jeg kan godt den dag.
Per, han kan godt den dag, siger han her. Jeg håber også, at nogle af jer andre har lyst til det. Skulle I nu have lyst til at se hele sessionen her igen på et tidspunkt, så vil vi efter editeringen, når videomanden er blevet ædruelig igen, så vil, når han har editeret videoen her, så vil den lagt op på vores YouTube-kanal, og vi vil også lave et link på Facebook, sådan at de kan finde den der i hvert fald. Men ellers, hvis der ikke er flere, der har kommentarer, nogen der vil sige noget live, så vil jeg runde af her og sige mange tak for i aften. Det er dejligt at se så mange mennesker igen. Jeg tror, jeg gentager mig selv et par gange nu. Men det er fedt. Tak for i aften.